If you were to ask if that old saying, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, were true, I'd answer that yes, it's generally accurate. The statistics suggest it, and I have a link from the Federal Reserve and Pew Research Center in the description as citations to back it up. Actually, the wealth gap is increasing at an alarming pace. Unfortunately, that phrase has been so overused, it's more of a teenager triggering eye-roll moment than an actual realization of truth. But here's a question that might take you off guard. Who in America pays the highest percentage of federal income taxes? Easy answer, it's the rich. The US has a progressive tax system, meaning those with higher incomes are supposed to pay a higher percentage. Yet, surprising as it may be, according to an AP NORC April 2024 poll reported by CBS News, 6 in 10 Americans believe that middle-income households shoulder the highest tax burden. They're wrong. So yes, the rich pay the highest federal income tax rate. But let's not break out the confetti just yet. The current top federal tax rate in 2024 is 37%. Compare that to the 94% peak during World War II in 1944 and 1945. We were fighting Nazis, and everyone had skin in the game. The rate stayed high between 80% and 90% for a good chunk of the century, dropping into the 70s by the 60s, and then Ronald Reagan slashed it down to a paltry 28% in 1988. This, of course, was part of the grand failure known as trickle-down economics, the same policies that ballooned the federal deficit while telling the middle class, don't worry, your day will come. Any minute now, that wealth will trickle down to you. Spoiler, it never did. So, percentage-wise, the rich pay a lot less in taxes than they did through most of the 20th century. And because of loopholes, lobbying, unlimited PAC money, and a whole lot of political maneuvering, the uber-wealthy often get away with paying far less than they ought. Some of the names you hear on the news regularly? Yep, they're playing that game too. In this deep dive, we're going to expose how the rich are not just screwing you, they're screwing all of us. And if we're being honest, with climate change looming, they're screwing all life on Earth. That's just the opening, folks. If you haven't already paused the video to go register to vote, you really should. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty. Oh, and if this video seems a bit heavy, make sure you've watched our part 1 on Americans Don't Like to Talk About Money. In that video, we peel back the layers of why conversations about finances make people squirm, and why keeping silent is so harmful to you, me, society, governments, and, dare I say, the whole planet. If money talk makes you uncomfortable, I highly recommend starting there. Here's the problem. Americans cling to this idea of the American dream, that success is just a matter of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps. It's a cute notion, but it's about as real as a unicorn sipping tea in your backyard. Sure, some people hit the jackpot, but those are the exceptions, not the rule. You know what's really making dreams come true for the ultra-rich? Not hard work and perseverance, but inherited wealth, tax breaks, and a legal system rigged in their favor. Let's talk taxes again. Capital gains taxes? Dividends? These are the bread and butter of the wealthy. While you're out here grinding for a paycheck, they're making bank through investments, which are taxed at a much lower rate. The rich don't just get richer because they work harder. They get richer because their money makes more money. And they've got an entire wealth management industry helping them hide that money, minimize taxes, and park assets in real estate shell companies, offshore accounts, and even tax-free zones known as free ports, where the rich stash art, gold, and other valuables far from the reach of the taxman. It gets better. In addition to having a system that allows them to hide and hoard wealth, some of the ultra-wealthy have the audacity to renounce their US citizenship and buy golden passports from other countries. What does that mean for the rest of us? Well, while they're sipping cocktails in Monaco, you and I are left holding the bag. Here's the ultimate irony, and you've probably seen it yourself. Many everyday Americans cheer for these very rich folks who are screwing them over. Why? Because some of them package their greed as virtue. They tell you that if they pay fewer taxes, they'll create more jobs for you. And people buy it. They buy it because they don't want to believe they've been sold a lie. And honestly, it's easier to believe that trickle-down economics is a real thing than to come to terms with the fact that they've been taken for a ride. We've barely scratched the surface, though. In the next part of this article, we'll dive deep into how the rich have rigged the entire system to ensure they pay less and you pay more. By the time we're done, you'll have a clearer picture of just how badly the deck is stacked against you. In Part 2, I'll discuss my views on the 2024 presidential race as a primer for the rest of the article. If you're watching this after the November election, feel free to skip to Part 3. I probably shouldn't start this chapter with the following, but I want to be open and upfront with you, and I hope you grant me the courtesy of listening to my views and the explanation as to why I hold them. My channel, The Renaissance Spirit, as well as me personally, your narrator, Scott Layton, are endorsing and will be voting for Kamala Harris on Tuesday, November 5th, 2024. In this chapter, I will explain why, through careful analysis using reason, compassion, civic virtue, and critical thinking, I made this decision, and why it's incumbent upon each of us to understand what we believe, as well as the stakes and consequences of our choices. The thought of Donald Trump returning to power is troubling, to say the least. He embodies the idea of another rich guy trying to take over the world, which spells disaster for the vast majority of Americans and people abroad. Under Trump, pressing issues like climate change, wealth inequality, free speech, and the health of our democracy would not only persist but worsen. Here are my reasons for supporting Harris. Climate change. Trump has repeatedly demonstrated a disregard for environmental issues. His administration rolled back numerous regulations aimed at mitigating climate change. Under his leadership, the urgency to address this existential crisis would be overshadowed by corporate interests. We've already witnessed the catastrophic impacts of climate change, from the melting of Arctic ice to the alarming die-offs of coral reefs, and a second Trump administration would ignore the imperative for immediate action. Wealth inequality. Trump's tax policies disproportionately benefited the rich, while doing little for working-class Americans. His return would likely exacerbate the wealth gap, prioritizing tax breaks for the ultra-wealthy over essential social services. Free speech. Trump has frequently attacked the press and marginalized dissenting voices, undermining the principles of free speech and open discourse that are foundational to democracy. His aggressive stance against critics fosters an environment of fear and repression, further eroding the public's trust in institutions. Democracy, from Louis DeJoy's controversial changes to the U.S., postal service to the rampant gerrymandering and voter suppression tactics employed by his party, Trump's agenda undermines the very fabric of our democratic system. Tactics like limiting access to polling places, making it a crime to provide food and water to voters standing in line, and enacting voter ID laws are designed to disenfranchise marginalized groups, particularly minorities, the poor, and people with disabilities. Methods like poll watching, hand counting ballots, purging voter records, and closing polling places disproportionately affect communities of color. Furthermore, actions such as restricting voter registration, redistricting to dilute minority representation, and undercutting census records are all tactics currently employed by the Republican Party, driven by the false narrative of widespread voter fraud. If Trump wins, we can expect these voter disenfranchisement tactics to expand even further. So, is that really the America we want to live in? Just like Rome before it, America has always been a land of immigrants. The continent was already settled before the so-called Age of Discovery, yet we are all humans. One race, our DNA 99.9% the same. Don't we all deserve the same human rights? Understanding money and civic finance by consuming news from reliable sources without hidden agendas is crucial. Citizens should not only vote but also engage actively in politics. The examples we'll explore in the subsequent chapters will only worsen under a Trump administration, which seeks to give the ultra-rich even more tax breaks than during his first term. Trump's vision includes deconstructing civil and professional states, deregulating industries, consolidating power within the courts, and restricting free speech. Many of these initiatives encapsulated in his Project 2025 and the less spoken about Agenda 47. Project 2025 aims to overhaul government structures to favor ultra-wealthy interests at the expense of public welfare. Meanwhile, Agenda 47 ominously hints at a broader agenda to cement control over various aspects of American life, further entrenching the divide between the elite and the average citizen. This leads us back to the argument of the article that some of the rich are attempting to flip the bill, reversing who pays more to the state, while making the vast majority of the American people worse off as they bear more of the financial burden. My channel, known as The Renaissance Spirit, is dedicated to the pursuits of a just, equitable, and humanitarian world, and how we all need to be part of the solution to the issues facing us today. Our video topics encompass a range of subjects including news, analysis, history, politics, religion, personal development, society, culture, social and environmental justice, and other liberal arts and sciences, including insights drawn from ancient Rome and the Roman Empire. These historical contexts provide a vital lens through which we can compare and contrast our modern world. Living the Renaissance spirit means engaging with history, not as a distant past, but as a living dialogue that informs and enriches our present. It is a reminder of our dialogue with the future, our progeny and posterity, and the legacy we leave behind. Will we grant them a future free from fear of climate change and the specter of an eroded democracy? Or will they remember us as saviors of humanity and the natural world? The Renaissance spirit is more than just a philosophy. It's a style for living, learning, growing, and thinking. Together, let us continue this journey, finding inspiration in the stories of those who came before us and those who will come after us, forging a future guided by equality, wisdom, and compassion. As we navigate this critical moment in history, we must strive for beliefs that are reasoned and compassionate. Are we willing to change our minds if our beliefs do not hold true? If they do, are we ready to live by those ideals, or have we resigned ourselves to vice? That's what our channel is about. The Republican Party under Trump has long justified voter suppression tactics by invoking the false claim of widespread voter fraud. From Louis DeJoy's undermining of the Postal Service to gerrymandering and restrictive voting laws, these methods serve to disenfranchise voters, particularly people of color, the poor, and those with disabilities. Voter ID laws, poll closures, and restrictions on mail-in ballots disproportionately affect marginalized communities, silencing their voices. If Trump wins, these tactics will expand, further cementing minority rule and weakening democratic participation. Kamala Harris is a staunch defender of voting rights, advocating for measures to protect and expand access to the ballot for all Americans. Trump's strategy has long relied on creating division through culture wars, fostering animosity between different groups to maintain power. Whether it's using fear of immigrants, stoking racial tensions, or inflaming partisan divides, Trump benefits when Americans are pitted against each other. This tactic will only intensify if he regains power. Kamala Harris represents a different path, one of unity and healing, where differences are respected and common ground can be found. Trump's deregulatory agenda is designed to benefit large corporations at the expense of public welfare. Whether it's rolling back environmental protections, financial regulations, or healthcare safeguards, his policies favor the rich and powerful. Under Agenda 47, he promises to deconstruct the administrative state, essentially gutting government agencies that protect consumer rights, the environment, and workers. This would leave everyday Americans vulnerable to corporate exploitation while further enriching the elites. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, has committed to strengthening regulations that protect consumers, workers, and the environment. Project 2025 and Agenda 47 aren't just abstract concepts. They're blueprints for an America where the rich dictate the rules and everyone else bears the financial burden. These agendas call for dismantling public institutions, rolling back regulations, and consolidating power within a small group of elites. In essence, the flipping the bill phenomenon becomes even more pronounced. The rich get richer, the middle class shrinks, and the poor bear the brunt of the nation's financial responsibilities. If we fail to act, we may not get another chance to preserve the democracy we fought so hard to build. The Renaissance spirit dedicated to justice, equity, and humanitarianism stands in stark contrast to the cynical, authoritarian world that Trump and his supporters envision. Voting for Kamala Harris is not just a political decision. It's a moral imperative, a commitment to preserving the ideals of the Renaissance spirit: wisdom, reason, compassion, and civic duty. As we explore the details in the coming chapters, whether it's the devastating impact of wealth inequality, the dismantling of environmental protections, or the erosion of voting rights. Remember this. Our choice in 2024 will determine the trajectory of our nation and the world. America, like Rome before it, has always been a place of immigrants, diversity, and the shared pursuit of liberty. Will we let it fall to authoritarianism, or will we rise armed with reason and compassion to create a better future? The concept of flipping the bill is central to understanding how the ultra-wealthy manipulate systems to protect and grow their fortunes while pushing the financial burden onto the broader population. In this chapter, we'll explore how the rich hide assets, manipulate financial systems, and use their influence to skew the rules in their favor. The policies and actions supported by Trump and his allies exacerbate this system of inequality, creating an economic environment where the vast majority of Americans, along with people worldwide, suffer as a result. At the core of financial manipulation is the ability of the wealthy to hide their assets. Through offshore tax havens, shell companies, and complex financial instruments, the ultra-rich can legally shield billions of dollars from taxes, effectively shifting the tax burden onto ordinary citizens. Under Trump's administration, tax cuts for the wealthy and corporations facilitated this process, creating loopholes that allowed individuals and businesses to evade paying their fair share. Trump's own history of using loopholes to avoid paying taxes, including losses claimed on business ventures to offset personal income, reflects this broader issue of financial evasion. If Trump is re-elected, this trend will continue, with more tax cuts for the wealthy, exacerbating the growing divide between the rich and everyone else. Trump's agenda isn't just to cut taxes, but to dismantle the very mechanisms designed to hold the ultra-wealthy accountable. Financial institutions and government agencies, such as the IRS, would be further weakened, preventing any meaningful enforcement of tax laws for the rich. Corporate tax evasion goes hand in hand with individual asset hiding. Multinational corporations, many of which are controlled by the ultra-rich, exploit gaps in global tax laws to avoid paying taxes where they operate. This is done through transfer pricing, profit shifting, and the use of low-tax jurisdictions. Instead of contributing to the public good, these corporations funnel profits into tax havens, leaving workers and consumers to pick up the tab in the form of higher taxes, reduced services, and lower wages. Trump's first term saw a significant reduction in the corporate tax rate, ostensibly to boost economic growth, but in reality, it served to increase profits for the wealthiest corporations. The Trump administration also weakened the enforcement of regulations that prevent corporations from engaging in these types of financial manipulations. Under a second Trump term, these policies would continue, allowing corporations to further siphon off public wealth while avoiding their obligations to society. Trump's Project 2025 and Agenda 47 highlight his plan to dismantle the civil and professional state. By deconstructing agencies that oversee financial regulation, consumer protections, and corporate accountability, these initiatives would allow the wealthy to operate with even less oversight. The consequences of such deregulation would be devastating for ordinary Americans. Banks and financial institutions, freed from the constraints of regulation, would engage in riskier behavior, potentially leading to another financial crisis. Additionally, the courts already packed with conservative judges during Trump's first term would become even more skewed in favor of corporate interests. These judges often rule in favor of deregulation and against labor rights, consumer protections, and environmental safeguards. This judicial takeover would further entrench the power of the wealthy and make it nearly impossible for the average citizen to challenge corporate abuses. While financial manipulation happens behind the scenes, the ultra-wealthy and their political allies like Trump use culture wars and disinformation to distract the public from the true sources of their economic woes. By stoking fear and division, they create scapegoats immigrants, minorities, or liberals who are blamed for societal problems. Meanwhile, the real issues of wealth inequality and economic exploitation go unaddressed. Through coordinated messaging and the use of media outlets, Trump and his allies push false narratives about tax cuts benefiting everyone, about the dangers of socialism, or about how deregulation creates jobs. These tactics are designed to keep the public misinformed and disengaged, preventing any meaningful opposition to policies that benefit the rich at the expense of everyone else. Kamala Harris, by contrast, has a history of holding the wealthy and powerful accountable. From her time as Attorney General of California, where she took on big banks and corporate interests, to her current policies on tax fairness, Harris represents a path toward closing the loopholes that allow the rich to evade their responsibilities. Her platform includes tax reforms that would ensure the ultra-wealthy pay their fair share, increased enforcement of corporate accountability, and measures to protect consumers and workers from financial exploitation. Voting for Harris in November 2024 is a vote for an economy that works for everyone, not just the rich. It's a vote to restore fairness, ensure accountability, and protect the future from the destructive greed of financial elites. The Renaissance spirit is dedicated to the pursuit of justice, equity, and the betterment of society for all. Financial manipulation and asset hiding are antithetical to these values. In this election, we have the opportunity to push back against the forces of greed and inequality that seek to control our society. If we do not act now, we may lose the chance to restore balance and fairness to our economy. In the next chapter, we will explore the broader societal impacts of these financial manipulations, including the consequences for democracy, the environment, and social justice. The fight against financial manipulation is not just an economic issue, it is a moral one, central to the future of our democracy and the world we want to build. Externalities. The hidden or ignored costs that corporations and the wealthy do not pay are borne by ordinary citizens. From environmental damage to social inequality, the actions of the elite create widespread harm that erodes the quality of life for the vast majority. In this chapter, we'll delve into how Trump's policies and those of his allies amplify these externalities and shift the burden onto everyday Americans. One of the most glaring examples of externalities is the impact of climate change. Corporations, especially in fossil fuels, energy, and transportation, are among the largest polluters, contributing significantly to global warming. Yet, rather than paying for the environmental damage they cause, they offload the costs onto the public in the form of rising temperatures, more frequent natural disasters, and the loss of biodiversity. The poor and vulnerable communities are often the most affected by these environmental disasters, though they contributed the least to the problem. Trump's administration not only ignored the looming climate crisis, but actively worsened it by rolling back environmental regulations. Under his leadership, protections for clean air, water, and public lands were gutted to favor corporate profits, despite overwhelming scientific evidence about the dangers of climate change. Trump's withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement and his appointment of climate change deniers to key positions in government signaled his disregard for the environment and the future of the planet. A second Trump term would likely continue this trend of deregulation, accelerating climate change and causing even greater harm to the public, especially to marginalized communities. By contrast, Kamala Harris supports aggressive policies to combat climate change, holding polluters accountable and investing in renewable energy. Voting for Harris is a vote to mitigate the devastating externalities of climate inaction, ensuring a healthier and more sustainable future for all. Another major externality created by the ultra-wealthy is wealth inequality. As the rich grow richer through tax cuts, deregulation, and financial manipulation, the middle class and the poor are left to deal with underfunded public services, rising living costs, and stagnant wages. The erosion of public goods, healthcare, education, transportation directly correlates with the concentration of wealth among a small elite. When corporations and wealthy individuals evade taxes, they leave fewer resources available for essential public services. Schools, hospitals, and infrastructure deteriorate as government budgets are squeezed. This is especially harmful in low-income and minority communities, where access to quality education and healthcare is already limited. Trump's tax cuts for the rich and corporations exacerbated this problem, widening the gap between the wealthy and everyone else while undermining the quality of life for millions of Americans. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, has long advocated for policies that reduce income inequality and reinvest in public services. Her support for affordable health care, free community college, and expanded social safety nets are critical to addressing the growing disparities caused by the externalities of wealth hoarding. Electing Harris in 2024 would help reverse the trend of public disinvestment and ensure that all Americans, not just the wealthy, benefit from economic growth. Externalities are not only economic or environmental, they also have deep social and racial implications. The disproportionate impact of voter suppression, gerrymandering, and disenfranchisement on minority communities is a direct consequence of policies that favor the rich and powerful. By manipulating electoral systems, Trump and his allies have sought to maintain control, ensuring that the voices of the poor, people of color, and other marginalized groups are minimized. Trump's policies have further entrenched systemic inequalities, from his harsh immigration enforcement that disproportionately affects communities of color to his defense of police violence and opposition to criminal justice reform. These actions create a culture of division, where the rich and powerful maintain their status by exploiting the vulnerabilities of the marginalized. Under Trump's leadership, policies designed to foster unity and equality have been replaced by those that exacerbate division and inequality. His re-election would almost certainly mean more of the same: continued voter suppression, attacks on civil rights, and policies that benefit the wealthy at the expense of the vulnerable. Harris, by contrast, has fought for justice, equality, and human rights throughout her career, standing up for immigrants, people of color, and the disenfranchised. Corporate externalities extend beyond environmental damage and social inequality. The power of large corporations to influence policy, shape public opinion, and dictate the terms of economic engagement also imposes costs on society. Corporations use their financial power to lobby for policies that benefit them while undermining labor rights, consumer protections, and the democratic process itself. This creates a system where the interests of the few override the well-being of the many. Under Trump, corporate power has only grown. His administration rolled back worker protections, weakened unions, and eliminated regulations designed to protect consumers and the environment. By giving corporations free rein to pursue profit at all costs, Trump has allowed them to shift their burdens onto the public, whether through exploitative labor practices, unsafe products, or environmental destruction. Harris, on the other hand, has consistently challenged corporate power. Her policies aim to rein in corporate influence by increasing accountability, strengthening labor protections, and ensuring that corporations contribute their fair share to the public good. By electing Harris, we can begin to reverse the tide of corporate externalities that harm workers, consumers, and the environment. In addition to financial and environmental externalities, the manipulation of free speech and control of the media by the rich and powerful represents another significant public cost. Through ownership of major media outlets and influence over social media platforms, the wealthy shape public narratives to protect their interests and distract from the real issues. The spread of disinformation, fueled by Trump's allies and the alt-right, is part of a larger strategy to keep the public misinformed and divided. This disinformation campaign has dire consequences for democracy, as it undermines trust in institutions, distorts reality, and erodes the ability of citizens to make informed decisions. Trump's attack on the free press and his embrace of conspiracy theories only amplify these trends, creating a culture of distrust and paranoia. Harris, by contrast, supports policies that protect free speech and ensure that media platforms are held accountable for spreading disinformation. She has called for greater transparency and responsibility in the media, recognizing that an informed public is essential to a functioning democracy. The externalities created by financial manipulation, corporate power, and disinformation are not just abstract concepts, they have real consequences for all of us. From the destruction of the environment to the erosion of democracy, the actions of the wealthy and powerful impose costs that we cannot afford to ignore. The Renaissance spirit is about embracing reason, compassion, and civic duty in the face of these challenges. As citizens, we must understand the true costs of the policies and actions of the elite and take action to protect our future. Voting for Kamala Harris in November 2024 is a critical step in this process. It's a vote for justice, equality, and accountability, and against the externalities that threaten our environment, democracy, and social fabric. In the next chapter, we'll discuss how the rich screw us in legislative affairs and what is known as regulatory capture. Together, we can build a world that reflects the values of the Renaissance spirit, a world guided by knowledge, wisdom, and compassion for all. Another piece of the puzzle that allows the rich and powerful to dominate society at the expense of the public is their overwhelming influence on legislation and regulatory bodies. Through lobbying, political donations, and the revolving door between government and corporate sectors, the wealthy have captured the very institutions meant to hold them accountable. This phenomenon, known as regulatory capture, allows industries to effectively write the rules that govern them, ensuring that their interests come first, even when it harms the public. Lobbying is one of the most direct ways that corporations and the ultra-wealthy influence legislation. By hiring professional lobbyists to sway lawmakers, industries can ensure that laws are written with their interests in mind. These lobbyists often have close ties to political figures, helping them shape policy in ways that benefit their clients. This process distorts democracy, as the voices of ordinary citizens are drowned out by the wealth and influence of corporate interests. Many former legislators join the ranks of lobbying firms when they retire from Congress, creating a revolving door of agenda and intrigue. Trump's presidency saw a marked increase in the power of lobbyists, particularly from industries like fossil fuels, pharmaceuticals, and Wall Street. His administration was packed with former lobbyists, many of whom came from the very industries they were tasked with regulating. This resulted in the rollback of critical protections for workers, consumers, and the environment, all in the name of boosting corporate profits. By contrast, Kamala Harris has long called for campaign finance reform and greater transparency in lobbying. Her policies aim to reduce the outsized influence of money in politics, ensuring that lawmakers are accountable to their constituents rather than to corporate donors. Electing Harris would represent a step toward restoring the integrity of our legislative process and making it more responsive to the needs of the public. The revolving door between corporate America and government agencies is another key factor in regulatory capture. High-level executives frequently move between positions in the private sector and regulatory agencies, creating a system where regulators are often more concerned with protecting the industries they oversee than with safeguarding public welfare. This cozy relationship between corporations and government ensures that regulations are watered down or eliminated, allowing businesses to operate with little oversight. Trump epitomized the revolving door, appointing corporate insiders to head major regulatory bodies. For instance, Scott Pruitt, who had close ties to the fossil fuel industry, was put in charge of the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, where he systematically dismantled environmental protections. Similarly, Trump's Labor Department was run by individuals with a history of opposing workers' rights, resulting in the rollback of workplace safety regulations and the weakening of unions. In stark contrast, Harris has committed to appointing individuals with a proven track record of standing up for public interests rather than corporate insiders. Her administration would prioritize the appointment of regulators who believe in the mission of their agencies to protect consumers, workers, and the environment, rather than those who seek to undermine them for personal gain. One of the key goals of corporate lobbying and regulatory capture is to push for deregulation. Deregulation allows businesses to operate with fewer restrictions, maximizing profits but often at the expense of the public good, increasing those externalities we spoke about in the last chapter. Under Trump, deregulation was a central feature of his economic policy. His administration rolled back regulations in nearly every sector, including environmental protections, banking regulations, consumer safety laws, and labor protections. The consequences of deregulation are clear: environmental destruction, financial instability, and unsafe working conditions. Deregulation benefits a small elite while putting the rest of society at risk. By gutting regulatory agencies and slashing their budgets, Trump's administration made it nearly impossible for these agencies to do their job, further tilting the balance of power in favor of corporations. Harris, on the other hand, understands the need for smart regulation that protects the public without stifling innovation. She has pledged to restore critical regulations that were dismantled under Trump, particularly in the areas of environmental protection and consumer rights. Her policies would help level the playing field, ensuring that corporations are held accountable for their actions and that public safety is prioritized. One of the most significant drivers of legislative influence and regulatory capture is the Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United v. FEC, which opened the floodgates for unlimited corporate spending in elections. This decision effectively allows corporations and the wealthy to buy elections by flooding the political system with money. As a result, lawmakers are increasingly beholden to corporate donors rather than to the voters they represent. Trump, who benefited greatly from corporate donations, did nothing to address the corrupting influence of money in politics. In fact, his administration actively worked to dismantle campaign finance regulations and make it even easier for corporations to spend unlimited amounts on elections. This further entrenched the power of the wealthy, ensuring that they could continue to shape legislation to suit their interests. Harris, however, has been a vocal critic of Citizens United and has called for its repeal. She supports strong campaign finance reform, including public financing of elections, to ensure that politicians are accountable to the people rather than to corporate donors. By electing Harris, we can begin to reverse the influence of money in politics and restore democracy to its rightful place, where the people, not the wealthy elite, have the final say. Perhaps the most egregious example of regulatory capture can be seen in the fossil fuel industry. This industry has long used its financial power to influence legislation and undermine environmental regulations, despite overwhelming evidence that continued reliance on fossil fuels is driving climate change. Under Trump, the fossil fuel industry was given free rein to pollute, with little concern for the long-term consequences of its actions. Trump's withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement, his rollbacks of fuel efficiency standards, and his approval of new pipelines and drilling projects all served to benefit the fossil fuel industry at the expense of the planet. The oil and gas industry spent millions of dollars lobbying for these policies, ensuring that their profits continued to soar even as the climate crisis worsened. Harris, by contrast, has consistently stood up to the fossil fuel industry. She supports aggressive action on climate change, including rejoining the Paris Agreement, ending fossil fuel subsidies, and transitioning to renewable energy. Her policies would put an end to the fossil fuel industry's stranglehold on our political system, ensuring that the future of the planet is prioritized over short-term profits. The wealthy and powerful have spent decades building a system that allows them to manipulate legislation and capture regulatory agencies, ensuring that their interests are protected while the public bears the costs. This system has been reinforced by Trump, whose administration has only deepened the influence of corporate America on government. But this system is not unbreakable. The Renaissance spirit calls on us to challenge the status quo, to recognize the ways in which our democracy has been corrupted by money and influence, and to take action to restore it. By electing Kamala Harris in 2024, we can begin to dismantle the structures of legislative influence and regulatory capture, ensuring that our government works for the people, not the wealthy few. In the next chapter, how the rich screw us through labor exploitation and wage suppression. Together, we can build a future where justice, equity, and accountability reign supreme. At the heart of many of the problems we face as a society lies the exploitation of labor. The wealthiest individuals and corporations have built their fortunes on the backs of the working class, suppressing wages, undermining workers' rights, and creating a system where the vast majority of people struggle to make ends meet, while a small elite prospers. This form of economic exploitation is not new, but its scale and intensity have grown in recent years, exacerbated by policies that favor the wealthy and undermine the working class. In this section, we'll examine how labor exploitation and wage suppression have evolved in recent years, why they are central to the broader issues of wealth inequality and financial manipulation, and how these trends would worsen under a Trump administration. We'll also explore why Kamala Harris's platform offers a path forward for rebuilding a fairer labor system that treats workers with dignity, respects their rights, and ensures they receive their fair share of the wealth they help create. One of the most glaring symptoms of labor exploitation is the growing gap between the rich and the poor. Over the past several decades, productivity in the United States has increased dramatically, but wages for the average worker have remained relatively stagnant. This means that while workers are producing more wealth, they are not seeing the benefits of that increased productivity in their paychecks. Instead, the wealth they help create is being funneled to the top, contributing to the enormous concentration of wealth among the richest Americans. Under Trump's first administration, this wage suppression was not only maintained, but worsened through policies that favored corporations and the wealthy. Massive corporate tax cuts and deregulation incentivized businesses to maximize profits at the expense of workers, while weakening labor protections made it more difficult for workers to fight for higher wages and better working conditions. If Trump were to win again in 2024, we can expect this trend to continue, with even fewer protections for workers and even more power concentrated in the hands of corporations and the ultra-wealthy. A key component of wage suppression is the erosion of workers' rights. Unions, which have historically played a crucial role in securing higher wages and better working conditions, have been systematically weakened by decades of corporate lobbying and legislative efforts. Right-to-work laws, which weaken unions by allowing workers to opt out of paying union dues while still benefiting from union-negotiated contracts, have been passed in many states, undermining the power of organized labor. Under Trump, this attack on unions intensified. His administration rolled back labor protections, undermined collective bargaining rights, and appointed anti-union officials to key positions in the Department of Labor. If re-elected, Trump would likely continue this assault on workers' rights, making it even harder for workers to organize and demand fair wages. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, has been a strong advocate for workers' rights throughout her career. She supports policies that would strengthen unions, raise the minimum wage, and ensure that workers have the right to collectively bargain for better wages and working conditions. By supporting Harris in 2024, we can begin to reverse the decades-long attack on workers and ensure that they have the power to demand fair compensation for their labor. Deregulation has been one of the primary tools used by corporations to suppress wages and exploit workers. By weakening labor protections, environmental regulations, and safety standards, corporations are able to cut costs and maximize profits, often at the expense of workers' health and safety. This race to the bottom disproportionately affects low-income workers, who are more likely to be employed in industries with poor working conditions and fewer protections. Trump's administration embraced deregulation as a core component of its economic policy, rolling back hundreds of regulations designed to protect workers, consumers, and the environment. This deregulation not only increased corporate profits, but also made it easier for corporations to exploit workers without facing consequences. A second Trump administration would likely continue this trend, further weakening the protections that workers rely on to ensure fair wages and safe working conditions. Kamala Harris's platform, by contrast, emphasizes the importance of regulation in ensuring that corporations are held accountable for their treatment of workers. She supports stronger labor protections, including regulations that ensure fair wages, safe working conditions, and protections against wage theft. By electing Harris, we can begin to rebuild a regulatory framework that prioritizes the well-being of workers over corporate profits. One of the more insidious forms of labor exploitation is wage theft, where employers fail to pay workers the wages they are legally entitled to. This can take many forms, from failing to pay overtime to misclassifying workers as independent contractors to avoid paying benefits. Wage theft disproportionately affects low-wage workers, many of whom are already struggling to make ends meet. The rise of the gig economy has exacerbated this problem, as companies like Uber and Lyft have built their business models on the exploitation of independent contractors. By classifying workers as contractors rather than employees, these companies are able to avoid paying benefits like health insurance and workers' compensation, while also avoiding liability for wage theft and other labor violations. Under Trump, wage theft and the exploitation of gig workers have been allowed to flourish. His administration rolled back regulations that would have protected gig workers and made it easier for employers to misclassify workers as contractors. If re-elected, Trump would likely continue to side with corporations over workers, making it even harder for workers in the gig economy to secure fair wages and benefits. Kamala Harris has been a vocal advocate for gig workers and has supported legislation that would provide them with the same rights and protections as traditional employees. She understands that the future of work is changing and that we need policies that ensure all workers, regardless of how they are classified, are treated fairly and compensated appropriately. At its core, the Renaissance spirit is about restoring dignity to work. It recognizes that workers are not simply cogs in a machine, but human beings who deserve to be treated with respect and fairness. By embracing policies that protect workers' rights, ensure fair wages, and hold corporations accountable for their treatment of workers, we can begin to rebuild a labor system that values human dignity over corporate profits. Kamala Harris's platform is rooted in these principles. She supports policies that would raise the minimum wage, strengthen unions, and ensure that all workers are treated fairly and compensated appropriately for their labor. By electing Harris, we can take a step toward realizing the ideals of the Renaissance spirit and building a labor system that works for everyone, not just the wealthy few. Labor exploitation and wage suppression are not just economic issues, they are moral issues. The exploitation of workers for the benefit of the wealthy is a violation of the social contract and an affront to the principles of fairness and justice that should guide our society. As we approach the 2024 election, we have an opportunity to stand up for workers and demand a labor system that treats everyone with dignity and respect. By supporting Kamala Harris, we can begin to reverse the decades-long attack on workers and rebuild a labor system that works for everyone. This is not just about electing a candidate. It is about embracing the values of the Renaissance spirit and fighting for a future where all workers are treated fairly, compensated appropriately, and given the dignity they deserve. Let us stand together in support of Kamala Harris and the principles of fairness, justice, and accountability that she represents. And let us continue to fight for a labor system that reflects the values of the Renaissance spirit, a system that values human dignity over corporate profits and ensures that all workers have the opportunity to thrive. In our next chapter, we'll explain why prices are so high in America through price manipulation and economic dominations, methods of that some of the rich use to screw us. The manipulation of prices and economic dominance by large corporations and the wealthy have long been tools to extract more wealth from the average consumer while concentrating power at the top. From price gouging and monopolistic practices to the exploitation of planned obsolescence, these methods ensure that Americans are forced to pay more for inferior products and services while having little recourse to fight back. This section will examine how price manipulation and economic domination operate, including the emerging right to repair movement, which stands in opposition to these exploitative practices. It will also explain how these methods are used to keep the wealthy at the top while pushing economic burdens onto consumers, all of which are likely to worsen if Trump were re-elected. Finally, we'll explore how Kamala Harris's platform offers a path to rebalancing the power between corporations and consumers, ensuring more fairness and accountability. One of the most common ways corporations manipulate consumers is through planned obsolescence, a business strategy in which products are deliberately designed to wear out or become obsolete within a certain time frame. This forces consumers to purchase new products or pay for expensive repairs, often at intervals much shorter than the product's natural lifespan should allow. Whether it's electronics, household goods, or automobiles, planned obsolescence has become an ingrained practice across multiple industries, ensuring a steady stream of profits for corporations while placing a continuous financial strain on consumers. Corporations often mask planned obsolescence through rapid technological changes, releasing newer models with slightly upgraded features and hyping them as necessary improvements. In reality, many of these upgrades could have been included in earlier models, or simply represent minor enhancements that don't justify the exorbitant prices. Worse, older models are often intentionally hampered through software updates or by restricting access to necessary repairs, further forcing consumers to spend on replacements. Under Trump, corporate deregulation emboldened these practices by reducing oversight on corporate accountability. Kamala Harris has spoken out against corporate manipulation of consumers and is committed to introducing policies that will fight planned obsolescence. Her platform supports empowering regulatory bodies like the Federal Trade Commission, FTC, to ensure companies provide honest warranties, extend product life cycles, and stop the gaming of markets to force consumers into unnecessary purchases. Another way corporations extract wealth from consumers is through restrictive user agreements and the use of cheaper, shoddier materials. These practices have become pervasive across a range of industries, especially in tech, home appliances, and automobiles. Modern products often come with lengthy and complex user agreements that few people read or fully understand. Hidden within these agreements are clauses that severely limit consumer rights, such as the ability to sue companies for faulty products, warranty limitations, or repair restrictions. Corporations use these legal traps to avoid accountability and limit consumer recourse, leaving Americans stuck with defective products or expensive repairs. In tandem with restrictive user agreements, companies often cut corners by using cheaper materials in their products. This tactic, known as cost externalization, reduces production expenses but results in products that break down more quickly, forcing consumers to replace them or pay for repairs. Even major corporations, which rake in billions of dollars in profit, engage in this behavior to maximize their bottom line while exploiting the average consumer. If Trump were to win in 2024, his administration would likely continue reducing regulatory oversight, empowering corporations to continue exploiting consumers. His focus on corporate profit over consumer protection would further entrench these exploitative practices. In contrast, Kamala Harris's platform includes measures that will increase transparency in user agreements, require clearer terms and conditions, and crack down on deceptive practices that trap consumers into paying more for less. The right to repair movement has emerged as a counterforce to the increasingly common practice of corporations restricting access to repairs for their products. Companies like Apple, John Deere, and Tesla have come under fire for designing their products in ways that prevent consumers from repairing them on their own or through independent repair shops. Instead, consumers are forced to go through the company's own expensive repair services, or worse, told to replace the product entirely. These restrictions on repair not only force consumers to spend more, but also contribute to the environmental crisis by increasing waste and promoting a throwaway culture. Right to repair advocates are fighting for legislation that would require manufacturers to make repair manuals, tools, and replacement parts available to consumers and independent repair shops. This would empower consumers to fix their own products rather than being at the mercy of manufacturers, who are only interested in selling new products. The movement is also tied to environmental sustainability, as it promotes longer product life cycles and reduces e-waste. Trump's administration showed little interest in supporting right-to-repair initiatives, favoring corporate interests that limit consumer power. His re-election would likely stall the progress that has been made in this area. However, Kamala Harris has expressed support for the right-to-repair movement, and her platform includes measures that would strengthen consumer rights by mandating that companies allow repairs and ensuring transparency in product maintenance and longevity. At the macroeconomic level, price manipulation is not just about individual products, but also about controlling entire markets. The richest corporations and individuals often engage in monopolistic practices, buying out competitors, cornering markets, and using their economic power to set prices. By dominating industries, these corporations create environments in which consumers have little choice but to accept higher prices and lower quality goods. Amazon, for example, has used its market dominance to crush small businesses, dictate prices, and limit competition, all to maximize its own profits. Economic domination also gives these corporations the ability to set wages, influence legislation, and shape entire sectors of the economy in their favor. This leaves the average consumer and worker powerless to push back against rising costs, stagnant wages, and exploitative labor practices. Under Trump's previous administration, antitrust enforcement was weakened, and large corporations were given free rein to expand their monopolies. If Trump were to win again in 2024, this trend would likely continue, further consolidating corporate power and limiting market competition. Kamala Harris has long advocated for stronger antitrust enforcement to break up monopolies and restore competitive markets. She supports legislation that would regulate monopolistic behavior, prevent price manipulation, and ensure that consumers and small businesses are not being crushed by corporate giants. By supporting Harris, voters have the chance to rebalance power between corporations and consumers, ensuring that the American economy works for everyone, not just the rich. Price manipulation, planned obsolescence, restrictive user agreements, and economic domination are all part of a broader strategy employed by the wealthy and powerful to extract wealth from the average American while limiting their options and power. These practices place an undue financial burden on consumers, trap them in cycles of unnecessary spending, and concentrate economic power in the hands of a few elite corporations. Under a Trump administration, these exploitative tactics would be further entrenched, leaving consumers with fewer protections and more economic burdens. Kamala Harris's platform represents a critical opportunity to reverse these trends. By advocating for stronger consumer protections, supporting the right-to-repair movement, and increasing antitrust enforcement, Harris offers a path toward a more equitable economy, one in which consumers have the power to repair their products, access fair markets, and avoid being gouged by exploitative corporate practices. It's time to stand up for the rights of consumers, fight against corporate exploitation, and support a future where Americans can make informed choices about the products they buy, the repairs they need, and the markets they participate in. In 2024, that fight begins with electing Kamala Harris. In our next chapter, we'll discuss how the rich screw us through propaganda, media manipulation, and cultural control. One of the most powerful ways the wealthy maintain control over society is through the manipulation of media, the spread of propaganda, and the shaping of cultural narratives. By controlling the flow of information and influencing public perception, the rich and their corporate allies can sway elections, distort political debates, and stifle dissent. This section will explore how these tactics are used to maintain power, shape public opinion, and suppress opposition. We will examine the tools of media consolidation, disinformation campaigns, and cultural gatekeeping, showing how they are leveraged to entrench wealth and privilege. Lastly, we will highlight how Kamala Harris's vision offers a solution by restoring media integrity, promoting transparency, and empowering the voices of everyday Americans. Over the past few decades, the consolidation of media outlets into fewer and fewer hands has severely diminished the diversity of viewpoints available to the public. Media conglomerates like Rupert Murdoch's News Corp, Comcast, and Disney control vast swaths of television, radio, print, and digital platforms. With fewer independent voices, the media landscape has become increasingly dominated by corporate narratives that serve the interests of the rich. These conglomerates have the power to frame political debates, prioritize certain issues while ignoring others, and create echo chambers that distort reality. Media consolidation makes it easier for the wealthy to spread propaganda and influence public opinion, often by presenting biased coverage, sensationalizing certain stories, or completely ignoring critical issues like wealth inequality, labor rights, or corporate corruption. Under Trump's administration, deregulation of media ownership allowed this trend to worsen, leading to even more concentrated power over information. His support of media figures and outlets that push his own narrative further emboldened corporate control over the dissemination of news. Kamala Harris has been outspoken about the need for media reform, supporting legislation that would break up media monopolies and restore a diverse, independent press. Her platform calls for stricter regulations on media ownership, ensuring that news outlets are not used as tools for propaganda, but rather serve the public interest. By fostering a more open and diverse media landscape, Harris aims to restore accountability and give Americans access to a range of viewpoints that reflect their concerns and realities. Disinformation has become one of the most potent weapons in the hands of the wealthy and politically connected. By spreading falsehoods and conspiracy theories, disinformation campaigns create confusion, sow distrust in democratic institutions, and divert attention from the real issues that matter to everyday Americans. The 2016 and 2020 elections saw a rise in coordinated disinformation efforts, much of it amplified by corporate-backed media and social media algorithms designed to prioritize sensational content over truth. Whether it's climate change denial, the downplaying of wealth inequality, or the distortion of facts surrounding healthcare and taxation, disinformation campaigns have been used to keep the public misinformed and prevent meaningful change. These campaigns are often supported by corporate money funneled into think tanks, lobbying groups, and political action committees, PACs, that work to protect the status quo. Trump's presidency relied heavily on disinformation, from undermining trust in the electoral process to spreading false narratives about the COVID-19 pandemic, all of which benefited the wealthy, while distracting from their exploitation of the working class. Kamala Harris recognizes the dangers of disinformation and has pledged to address it through increased transparency, regulation of social media platforms, and greater investment in media literacy programs. Her approach seeks to equip Americans with the tools to critically assess the information they consume, ensuring that voters are not misled by corporate-backed lies. A Harris administration would work to hold social media companies accountable for the spread of disinformation, requiring platforms to take responsibility for the content they promote, and ensuring that algorithms do not prioritize profit over truth. Beyond media and disinformation, the wealthy also exert influence through cultural gatekeeping, shaping the broader narratives that define societal values, norms, and aspirations. Corporate-funded media, entertainment, and even educational institutions often promote cultural messages that emphasize consumerism, individualism, and the pursuit of wealth as the highest ideals. These narratives distract from collective action, civic engagement, and the pursuit of the common good, reinforcing the dominance of the rich while marginalizing alternative worldviews. For example, the glorification of billionaires in popular culture, the portrayal of wealth as a sign of virtue, and the stigmatization of social safety nets as handouts all contribute to a culture that excuses inequality and justifies the vast disparities in power and resources. Cultural gatekeeping also extends to the suppression of movements for economic justice, racial equality, and environmental sustainability, as the rich seek to maintain control over the direction of social change. Trump's presidency amplified these cultural dynamics by aligning himself with wealthy elites, while dismissing grassroots movements like Black Lives Matter and the fight for a livable minimum wage. In contrast, Kamala Harris's platform emphasizes the need for cultural inclusivity and the promotion of values that reflect the diversity and aspirations of all Americans. Harris has long advocated for amplifying marginalized voices, ensuring that cultural institutions reflect the experiences of everyday people rather than serving as mouthpieces for the wealthy. By supporting policies that invest in public media, arts programs, and inclusive education, Harris seeks to democratize cultural production and empower Americans to reclaim their narratives from corporate control. Another tactic of the wealthy is to weaponize fear and distrust, particularly around issues of race, immigration, and crime. By stoking fear, elites divert attention from economic exploitation and instead focus public outrage on scapegoats, immigrants, minority groups, or the working poor. Trump's rhetoric often revolved around creating fear of the other, while distracting his base from his policies that disproportionately benefited the rich. His administration used fear of immigrants, Muslims, and marginalized communities to foster division, all while enacting tax cuts for the wealthy and gutting social programs that help the poor. Fear-based politics are incredibly effective because they create a sense of urgency and threat that distracts from the underlying economic exploitation. Rather than holding the rich accountable for wage stagnation or the gutting of social services, fear-driven narratives direct public anger at convenient targets. This strategy of divide and conquer has been a tool of the rich throughout history, and Trump wielded it expertly. Kamala Harris has spoken out against the politics of fear and division, calling for unity and collective action in the face of challenges like wealth inequality, climate change, and healthcare access. Her platform is built on the belief that by working together, Americans can overcome the divisions that the wealthy exploit for their own gain. Harris's policies aim to foster a sense of shared purpose and solidarity, rejecting the culture of fear that benefits only the rich. Propaganda, media manipulation, and cultural control are powerful tools used by the rich to maintain their dominance over American society. By controlling the flow of information, spreading disinformation, and shaping cultural narratives, the wealthy are able to protect their interests while disempowering the public. These tactics are designed to keep Americans divided, confused, and distracted from the real issues that affect their lives. A second Trump term would likely see an escalation of these tactics, further entrenching the power of the wealthy while limiting the ability of ordinary Americans to access truthful information or participate in shaping their culture. Kamala Harris offers a path forward that includes breaking up media monopolies, regulating disinformation on social media, and promoting cultural inclusivity. Her platform aims to restore integrity to the media, empower independent voices, and ensure that the American people are not manipulated by corporate interests. The battle for the soul of America is also a battle for control over its media, its culture, and its public consciousness. In 2024, voters have a chance to choose a future where media serves the people, not the wealthy. Kamala Harris stands ready to fight for that future, and it's up to the American people to join her in reclaiming their right to truth, fairness, and justice. In the next chapter, we'll return to lobbying and broaden the conversation to bribery and political manipulation, more tools that the rich use to screw us. Lobbying, bribery, and political manipulation represent some of the most insidious ways that the wealthy exert their influence over government policy. Through well-funded lobbying efforts, campaign donations, and backroom deals, the the richest Americans and corporate elites are able to shape laws, weaken regulations, and ensure that their interests are prioritized over those of the public. This section will explore how these tactics are used to tilt the playing field in favor of the rich, creating a political system that serves the few at the expense of the many. We will also examine how Kamala Harris's platform seeks to reform these corrupt practices, restore trust in government, and empower ordinary citizens. One of the most direct ways the wealthy manipulate the political system is through lobbying, a practice that has exploded into a multi-billion-dollar industry in the United States. Corporations, industry groups, and wealthy individuals hire professional lobbyists to advocate on their behalf in Washington, D.C. These lobbyists have unprecedented access to lawmakers, using their influence to shape legislation, regulatory policy, and government contracts. The goal of these lobbying efforts is simple: ensure that the laws passed benefit the rich, often at the expense of workers, consumers, and the environment. Lobbyists working for powerful industries like fossil fuels, pharmaceuticals, and financial services have been particularly successful in securing favorable policies. For example, the oil and gas industry has long lobbied against meaningful climate change legislation, ensuring that their profits remain protected while the planet suffers. The pharmaceutical industry has used lobbying to prevent the government from negotiating lower drug prices, keeping life-saving medications out of reach for many Americans. Meanwhile, Wall Street has successfully lobbied to roll back financial regulations designed to prevent another economic crash, putting the economy at risk while reaping record profits. Under Trump, the power of lobbyists only grew, as his administration embraced deregulation and slashed oversight of industries that stood to benefit from lax enforcement. Corporate lobbyists were frequently appointed to key regulatory positions, allowing them to shape the rules that govern their own industries. This revolving door between corporate lobbying and government policymaking has eroded public trust and deepened the sense that the system is rigged in favor of the rich. Kamala Harris has long advocated for reforming the lobbying industry, calling for greater transparency and restrictions on corporate influence in politics. Her platform includes banning lobbyists from holding positions within the government, ensuring that the public interest is not compromised by conflicts of interest. Harris also supports stricter disclosure requirements for lobbying activities, so that the American people know who is influencing their lawmakers and what policies are being pushed. By shining a light on lobbying, Harris seeks to break the stranglehold that corporate interests have on the political process. Bribery, though illegal, remains a significant problem in American politics, as wealthy individuals and corporations use their resources to buy influence in more covert ways. While direct bribery exchanging money for favors has largely been driven underground, more subtle forms of corruption are rampant. Campaign donations, super PACs, and dark money groups allow the rich to funnel vast sums of money into political campaigns without direct accountability, creating an environment where politicians are beholden to their wealthy donors rather than their constituents. One of the most notorious examples of this system is the Citizens United Supreme Court decision, which opened the floodgates for unlimited corporate spending on elections. By allowing corporations and the ultra-rich to spend unlimited amounts of money through super PACs, the decision has effectively legalized a form of bribery. Politicians who rely on this money for re-election are incentivized to prioritize the interests of their wealthy donors over those of the general public. This has led to policies that favor tax cuts for the rich, deregulation of industries, and cuts to social programs that benefit working-class Americans. Dark money political spending by organizations that do not disclose their donors further compounds the problem, as it allows the wealthy to influence elections and policy decisions in secret. This lack of transparency undermines the integrity of the democratic process and prevents voters from knowing who is really behind the political ads and campaigns they see. Trump benefited greatly from dark money spending during his campaigns, receiving millions of dollars in undisclosed contributions from wealthy donors and corporations that stood to gain from his policies. Kamala Harris has been a vocal critic of the influence of dark money and the role of super PACs in American politics. Her platform includes overturning Citizens United, implementing public financing for elections, and increasing transparency around campaign donations. Harris believes that by limiting the influence of money in politics, lawmakers will be more accountable to the public and less beholden to wealthy special interests. Her vision for political reform seeks to restore integrity to the electoral process and ensure that all Americans, not just the rich, have a voice in shaping the future of the country. Beyond lobbying and bribery, the wealthy also use more subtle forms of political manipulation to ensure that government serves their interests. This includes gerrymandering, voter suppression, and the manipulation of public opinion through think tanks and advocacy groups funded by corporate money. These tactics are designed to tilt the political playing field in favor of the rich, making it harder for ordinary Americans to hold their leaders accountable. Gerrymandering, the practice of drawing electoral district boundaries to favor one party or group, has been used by both Democrats and Republicans to entrench power. However, in recent years, it has been increasingly used to protect the interests of wealthy donors and corporations, ensuring that their preferred candidates are elected and remain in office. By manipulating district boundaries, gerrymandering undermines the principle of fair representation and allows the rich to maintain control over the political process. Voter suppression efforts, such as strict voter ID laws, purging of voter rolls, and limiting access to early voting, disproportionately affect low-income communities and communities of color. These tactics are often supported by wealthy conservatives who seek to suppress the votes of those who might support policies that challenge their economic dominance. Trump's efforts to undermine mail-in voting during the 2020 election were a clear example of this tactic, as he sought to delegitimize votes from groups that were less likely to support him. In addition to these direct forms of manipulation, the wealthy also influence politics through the funding of think tanks, advocacy groups, and political organizations that promote policies favorable to their interests. These groups often produce research, policy recommendations, and public messaging that shape political debates and create the appearance of grassroots support for policies that benefit the rich. This astroturfing of political movements creates the illusion of popular support for policies like tax cuts for the wealthy or deregulation of industries, while in reality, these policies serve only a small elite. Kamala Harris's platform seeks to address these forms of political manipulation by supporting voting rights legislation, independent redistricting commissions, and campaign finance reform. Harris has been a strong advocate for expanding access to the ballot, particularly for marginalized communities, and has pledged to protect voting rights against suppression efforts. Her vision for a fair and just political system includes ensuring that all Americans have an equal voice in elections, free from the undue influence of wealth and power. Lobbying, bribery, and political manipulation are the tools by which the wealthy have seized control of the American political system. These tactics ensure that government serves the interests of the rich, while the needs of ordinary Americans are ignored. From the billions spent on lobbying to the dark money that floods elections, the influence of wealth on politics has reached unprecedented levels. A second Trump term would likely see these practices continue unchecked, further entrenching the power of the rich and deepening the corruption of American democracy. In contrast, Kamala Harris offers a bold vision for political reform that seeks to break the grip of money on politics, restore trust in government, and empower the voices of everyday Americans. In the 2024 election, voters have the chance to choose a future where democracy is not for sale to the highest bidder. Harris's platform represents a path forward, one that prioritizes transparency, accountability, and fairness in the political system. By tackling the corrupt practices of lobbying, bribery, and political manipulation, Harris aims to restore the promise of democracy, a government of, by, and for the people. In the next chapter, we'll discuss the divide and conquer strategy of the rich, a tool they've used to screw us for a while now. While the wealthy manipulate policy, hoard resources, and shape political outcomes, they must also ensure that the general population remains distracted and divided. A unified, politically engaged populace poses a threat to the status quo of elite dominance, so division and distraction become essential tools in maintaining control. By sowing discord, fostering tribalism, and promoting cultural wars, the rich effectively keep ordinary Americans from banding together to demand real change. This section explores the various tactics used by the powerful to pit different groups against one another and keep the masses focused on anything but the structural inequalities that are harming them. One of the most effective ways to maintain control over the masses is through the creation of division along racial, ethnic, religious, and political lines. The ruling class has long known that a fractured population is much easier to control than a united one. By encouraging tribalism and stoking animosities between different groups, the wealthy prevent the formation of a unified front that could challenge their power. This strategy of division has been particularly evident in the way race has been weaponized in American society. For centuries, wealthy elites have used race as a tool to divide poor and working class whites from people of color, ensuring that these groups remain suspicious of one another rather than focusing on the shared struggles they face under economic inequality. The legacy of this tactic is still apparent today in political rhetoric that exploits racial and ethnic tensions to keep the public divided and distracted. Donald Trump masterfully wielded this tactic during his time in office, often using inflammatory language about immigrants, people of color, and religious minorities to create an us versus them narrative. By framing marginalized groups as scapegoats for economic and social problems, Trump distracted from the real source of economic inequality policies that disproportionately benefit the rich. His supporters, many of whom were struggling economically, were led to believe that their problems were caused by immigrants or minority communities rather than by the unchecked greed of the wealthy elite. Kamala Harris, by contrast, has made it clear that unity, rather than division, is the key to addressing the systemic challenges that face America. Her platform emphasizes the need to build bridges across racial, ethnic, and political lines, recognizing that the only way to achieve meaningful progress is through solidarity. Harris seeks to shift the focus away from divisive rhetoric and onto the shared goals of economic justice, equality, and opportunity for all Americans. In addition to sowing division, the wealthy also use the media to distract the public from the deeper issues at play. Entertainment, sensationalism, and misinformation are pumped into the media ecosystem to keep the populace focused on trivial matters, rather than on the economic and political systems that are failing them. Corporate-owned media, influenced by the interests of the rich, often prioritizes stories that grab attention but do little to foster informed, critical thinking among the public. 24-hour news cycles filled with sensationalist headlines, celebrity scandals, and partisan bickering dominate the airwaves, while deeper discussions about wealth inequality, climate change, and government corruption are sidelined. Even major news events, such as political scandals or natural disasters, are often presented in a way that emphasizes spectacle over substance, further reducing the public's ability to grasp the structural forces at play. The explosion of social media has only amplified this problem, designed to maximize engagement, often pushing users toward the most sensational or emotionally charged content. This creates a feedback loop where outrage and misinformation spread rapidly, drowning out meaningful discussion and distracting the public from the pressing issues that affect their daily lives. The wealthy, who often own or control these media platforms, benefit from this dynamic, as it keeps the public divided, misinformed, and distracted. Trump was notorious for using social media as a tool of distraction, regularly tweeting inflammatory or outrageous statements to divert attention away from his administration's failures. His constant use of Twitter served as a smokescreen, ensuring that the public was always reacting to his latest controversy rather than organizing to challenge his policies. In contrast, Kamala Harris has spoken out about the need to address misinformation and the corrosive impact of social media on public discourse. Her platform includes policies aimed at increasing media literacy, promoting responsible journalism, and holding tech companies accountable for the role they play in shaping public opinion. Another key tactic in keeping the masses distracted is the promotion of cultural wars, which are fueled by ideological conflicts over issues like abortion, LGBTQ+ rights, and gun control. While these issues are certainly important, the constant media focus on cultural battles can often obscure the more fundamental economic and political struggles that unite most Americans. The wealthy and powerful benefit from the fact that while Americans are arguing over cultural issues, the mechanisms of wealth extraction and political manipulation continue unabated. Cultural wars are particularly effective at rallying political bases around emotional issues, distracting voters from the ways in which their economic interests are being undermined. For example, conservative politicians, many of whom are backed by wealthy donors, have long used issues like gun rights and religious freedom to energize their base, diverting attention away from policies that favor tax cuts for the rich and deregulation of industries. By keeping the focus on divisive cultural issues, the wealthy are able to keep working-class Americans fighting one another while they continue to hoard wealth and power. Trump was a master at inflaming cultural wars, regularly taking extreme positions on divisive issues to shore up support from his base. His attacks on Black Lives Matter protesters, his stance on immigration, and his opposition to LGBTQ+ rights were all part of a broader strategy to divide the country and keep voters focused on identity politics rather than economic justice. In contrast, Kamala Harris's platform focuses on addressing the underlying economic and social inequalities that fuel these cultural conflicts. Rather than fanning the flames of division, Harris seeks to build consensus around shared values and goals, such as expanding access to healthcare, improving education, and creating good-paying jobs for all Americans. The strategy of dividing and distracting the masses is one of the most effective weapons in the rich's arsenal. By keeping Americans focused on cultural battles, sensational news stories, and partisan bickering, the wealthy are able to avoid accountability for the ways in which they manipulate the economy and the political system to serve their own interests. A second Trump term would likely see an intensification of these tactics, as his administration has consistently relied on division and distraction to maintain power. Trump's reliance on culture wars and social media distractions has proven effective in keeping the public from organizing against the policies that benefit the wealthy at the expense of the many. Under his continued leadership, Americans would be further divided, misinformed, and distracted from the real structural issues that need addressing. Kamala Harris represents a different path, one that seeks to unite Americans around shared values of justice, equality, and opportunity. Her platform addresses the root causes of division and distraction, from economic inequality to media manipulation, offering a vision for a more united and informed populace. By focusing on the issues that matter most, such as healthcare, education, and climate change, Harris aims to build a future where Americans are not distracted by petty divisions, but empowered to challenge the entrenched interests that seek to keep them divided. In the 2024 election, Americans have a choice: continue down a path of division, distraction, and manipulation, or unite around a common vision for a more just and equitable society. By rejecting the tactics of the rich and powerful, voters can reclaim their power and demand a government that works for all Americans, not just the wealthiest few. In our next chapter, we'll discuss how the rich have undermined education in America and their tools of intellectual suppression. Whether it's Bibles, prayers, or funding, the education system is one of the primary battlegrounds where the rich and powerful exert their influence, shaping not only the curriculum but also the intellectual and cultural development of future generations. By controlling and diminishing the quality of education, particularly in public schools, they ensure that the masses remain ill-equipped to challenge the systems that perpetuate inequality. Through underfunding, curriculum manipulation, and intellectual suppression, the wealthy have played a significant role in the dumbing down of America, fostering a population that lacks critical thinking skills, empathy, and a true sense of community. A critical component of the rich's strategy to maintain control is the systematic underfunding of public education. Over the years, less public funding has been directed towards schools, especially in lower income areas, leading to overcrowded classrooms, outdated materials, and a general decline in the quality of education. Many schools are crumbling, with unsafe environments, inadequate heating, and air conditioning issues that make it difficult for students to focus. As global warming intensifies, the lack of proper climate control in schools creates even more unbearable learning conditions. In many cases, particularly in rural and urban communities, schools are barely functioning, with deteriorating infrastructure and insufficient resources. This leaves students in those areas at a severe disadvantage compared to their wealthier counterparts, who attend well-funded private schools. This disparity perpetuates cycles of inequality, as children from poor backgrounds are deprived of the same educational opportunities afforded to the rich, leading to a widening wealth gap. An additional consequence of underfunding and political influence is the shift towards teaching to the test, rather than fostering critical thinking, reasoning, and creativity. Standardized tests, pushed by educational reforms and policies supported by corporate interests, have reduced education to a series of rote memorization tasks. Teachers are pressured to focus solely on preparing students for standardized exams, rather than developing their ability to think critically, analyze information, and engage with the world. This approach stifles intellectual curiosity and limits students' ability to question and challenge the structures around them. Without critical thinking skills, future generations are less likely to engage in meaningful civic participation, allowing the wealthy to maintain their control over political and economic systems. Education, which should be a tool for liberation and enlightenment, has instead been reduced to a mechanism for producing workers and consumers, rather than informed citizens who can participate fully in democracy. One of the most overlooked aspects of modern education is the absence of compassion as a central teaching value. Schools rarely emphasize emotional intelligence, empathy, or community building. Instead, students are often taught to prioritize individual achievement and competition over collaboration and kindness. This lack of compassion in education reflects broader societal values promoted by the wealthy, where success is measured in material terms and individual gain is prized over collective well-being. The me generation mentality, fostered by figures like Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump, has permeated educational institutions as well. This self-centered mindset encourages students to focus on personal success, often at the expense of others, which further divides society. Compassion and civic responsibility are rarely taught, leaving students unprepared to engage in acts of kindness, solidarity, or community-building skills that are essential for a healthy, functioning democracy. One of the most concerning trends in modern education is the marginalization of civics education. Civics, the study of citizenship and government, has been cut from many curricula, depriving students of a fundamental understanding of how their government works and what their role as citizens should be. Without civics education, future generations are less equipped to engage in democratic processes, leaving them vulnerable to manipulation by the wealthy and powerful. By diminishing the importance of civics, the rich ensure that the public remains apathetic, ignorant, and disengaged from political life. The lack of civic understanding contributes to widespread feelings of marginalization, despair, depression, and social disconnection. This ignorance leads to many people feeling powerless in the political system, and some turn to xenophobia, scapegoating, or apathy, rather than working towards positive change. This dynamic benefits the wealthy, who thrive in a system where the masses are divided, stressed, and unable to come together to challenge their power. In addition to their influence on education, the wealthy have also appropriated many aspects of cultural life that were once accessible to everyone. In ancient Rome, art, theater, and public events were enjoyed by both the rich and the poor. However, in modern times, cultural institutions such as museums, opera houses, and classical concerts have become increasingly out of reach for the average person. Art and culture, which should be a shared human experience, have been commodified by the rich. Museum tickets, concert prices, and theater admissions have skyrocketed, making these experiences unaffordable for many. Additionally, the expectation to dress in formal attire for events like opera or classical concerts creates further barriers for those who cannot afford expensive clothing. By creating these exclusive spaces, the wealthy have turned what should be a celebration of human achievement and creativity into a symbol of elitism. This cultural appropriation reinforces class divisions, as working class and lower income people are excluded from spaces that should be open to all. The rich have taken what was once common heritage and made it their own, contributing to the further isolation and marginalization of ordinary citizens. Compounding the issue, many important subjects are no longer taught in schools, either because of budget cuts or because they are not seen as practical in the eyes of corporate interests. Arts education, physical education, music, and philosophy have all been significantly reduced or eliminated from many school curricula. These subjects, which foster creativity, physical health, and deep thinking, are dismissed in favor of more practical courses that prepare students for the workforce, but fail to prepare them for life as well-rounded, thoughtful citizens. The failure to maintain school buildings and provide adequate facilities further exacerbates the problem. Many schools are falling apart, with leaking roofs, broken windows, and outdated technology. In some cases, schools lack basic amenities such as air conditioning, making the learning environment unbearable, especially in the face of rising global temperatures. How can students be expected to thrive in an environment that is physically falling apart? This decay of the educational infrastructure is a direct result of neglect by the wealthy and their influence on political leaders who prioritize tax cuts and deregulation over investment in public goods. As schools crumble, so too does the promise of equal opportunity for all, leaving future generations trapped in cycles of poverty and ignorance. The result of these intersecting issues is a generation of young people deprived of the knowledge, skills, and empowerment they need to thrive in the world. By underfunding education, focusing on standardized testing, neglecting critical thinking, and promoting a culture of individualism, the wealthy have ensured that many Americans lack the tools to challenge their dominance. The rich benefit from a population that is divided, distracted, and uneducated, as it allows them to continue consolidating wealth and power without facing significant resistance. Kamala Harris, in stark contrast to figures like Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump, recognizes the importance of education in building a just and equitable society. Her platform includes increased funding for public schools, an emphasis on civics education, and a commitment to making cultural institutions more accessible to all Americans. By investing in education and promoting empathy, critical thinking, and community engagement, Harris offers a vision for a future where the masses are empowered to challenge the status quo and work towards a more equitable society. The 2024 election is a pivotal moment in determining whether America will continue down a path of intellectual suppression and division, or whether it will invest in the education and empowerment of its people. Voters have the power to reject the influence of the wealthy and demand an education system that fosters critical thinking, compassion, and civic engagement. In doing so, they can help create a future where knowledge, art, and culture are accessible to all, and where the masses are no longer at the mercy of the few. In the next chapter, we'll discuss some more tools that the rich use to screw us, including social control via technological surveillance and data exploitation. In the modern age, the wealthy and powerful have found new tools to tighten their grip on society, technological surveillance, and data exploitation. No longer content to influence society solely through traditional means, the rich now rely on advanced technologies to monitor, manipulate, and control the public. This form of control is more insidious than ever before, operating in the shadows and leaving most people unaware of the extent to which their lives are being monitored and shaped. The internet, smartphones, and social media have transformed the way we live, communicate, and work. But these advancements have also created vast opportunities for corporations and the ultra-rich to exploit personal data for profit. Through a web of interconnected technologies, they track our every move, collecting data on our interests, behaviors, political views, and spending habits. This constant surveillance allows corporations to predict and influence our actions, manipulating consumer behavior to maintain their profit margins. The growing presence of surveillance capitalism is deeply concerning. Every time we use a smartphone, browse the web, or interact with a smart device, we are being watched. The data collected from these interactions is sold to corporations who use it to create personalized advertisements and predictive algorithms that manipulate our choices. Our online activities are constantly tracked and analyzed, giving companies unprecedented insight into our preferences, insecurities, and vulnerabilities. This data isn't just used to sell us products, it's also weaponized for social control. Powerful elites use the information gleaned from data mining to target individuals with political propaganda, to suppress dissenting voices, and to influence elections. The Cambridge Analytica scandal, where personal data was harvested to influence voters in the 2016 US election, is just one example of how this kind of exploitation has direct and far-reaching consequences. The exploitation of personal data goes beyond just targeted advertising. As data collection becomes more sophisticated, the lines between public and private life are increasingly blurred. Corporations routinely collect information on individuals without their consent or understanding, with massive data brokers amassing dossiers on almost everyone. This erosion of privacy creates a society where the powerful can monitor and control the masses with precision. Every click, every interaction, every purchase becomes part of a massive digital dossier that defines who we are in the eyes of the rich and powerful. These dossiers can then be sold, shared, or even used against us. For instance, insurance companies might use data on lifestyle choices gathered from fitness apps or social media profiles to adjust premiums, penalizing people based on information they never willingly offered. As surveillance technologies expand into every facet of life, think facial recognition cameras in public spaces, biometric data in workplaces, and smart home devices that listen in on conversations, our freedom to live without oversight erodes. The rich and their corporate interests benefit by creating a population that is constantly monitored and therefore more easily manipulated and controlled. The data collected from digital surveillance doesn't just reveal our habits, it's actively used to change them. Behavioral nudging, a tactic embraced by tech companies, is designed to subtly influence the decisions people make. This can be as innocuous as suggesting a product based on past purchases, but it can also be much more dangerous. For instance, algorithms on social media platforms manipulate the information we see, pushing certain political views, headlines, or ideologies based on what we've clicked on before. In essence, these algorithms create personalized echo chambers where individuals are shown information that reinforces their existing beliefs, while opposing viewpoints are suppressed. This process serves to deepen social and political divisions, making it easier for the rich to control the narrative and influence elections. When people are trapped in these digital bubbles, they are more susceptible to disinformation, manipulation, and propaganda. This is especially concerning in times of political upheaval. The use of data-driven political advertising to sway elections has become a powerful tool in the hands of the wealthy. Through micro-targeting, campaigns can tailor specific messages to small, hyper-personalized groups of voters, influencing their views without them even realizing they are being manipulated. The result is a society that is more fragmented, more polarized, and more easily controlled by those who hold the purse strings. Social media platforms, in particular, have become powerful tools of social control. While they present themselves as spaces for free expression and communication, they are ultimately profit-driven machines designed to keep users engaged for as long as possible. This is accomplished through algorithms that prioritize sensationalist content, often divisive or misleading, because it generates more clicks, shares, and ad revenue. These platforms have become breeding grounds for misinformation, conspiracy theories, and political manipulation. The constant barrage of sensationalist content fosters anxiety, division, and distrust, making it easier for the rich and powerful to maintain control. People are less likely to question the status quo or mobilize for collective action when they are constantly distracted by the latest scandal, viral outrage, or misleading political ad. Furthermore, social media addiction is now a widespread issue, with some platforms engineered to be as addictive as possible. The more time users spend scrolling through feeds, the more data they generate, which is then harvested and sold to the highest bidder. This cycle of engagement and exploitation ensures that corporations and the wealthy remain in control of both the narrative and the profits, while ordinary people are left distracted, divided, and disempowered. Technology has also been used to suppress dissent and protests, particularly by governments and corporations aligned with the interests of the wealthy. In some cases, facial recognition software has been deployed at protests to identify and track participants, enabling law enforcement to target activists. In others, social media platforms have been used to stifle dissent by censoring or deplatforming voices that challenge the status quo. For example, during the Hong Kong protests in 2019, technology played a critical role in both the organization of the movement and its suppression. While protesters used encrypted messaging apps to coordinate actions, the Chinese government employed sophisticated surveillance tools to monitor and intimidate them. This created a chilling effect, as protesters were aware that their every move was being watched and could lead to punishment. This kind of surveillance is not limited to authoritarian regimes. In democratic societies, too, the wealthy and powerful use technology to stifle dissent, monitor opposition movements, and ensure that their grip on power remains unchallenged. As surveillance technology continues to evolve, the potential for its abuse grows, creating a future where the rich can monitor and control the masses with unprecedented precision. Looking ahead, the integration of artificial intelligence (AI) into surveillance systems raises even more concerns. Predictive policing, for example, uses AI to analyze data and predict where crimes are likely to occur, allowing law enforcement to preemptively target certain neighborhoods or individuals. While proponents argue that this technology can reduce crime, it is often used to disproportionately target marginalized communities, reinforcing existing inequalities. In this way, predictive policing serves as yet another tool of social control, allowing the rich and powerful to maintain order in a way that benefits their interests. By focusing law enforcement resources on poor, minority, or politically disempowered communities, the wealthy ensure that the status quo is maintained while they continue to exploit the system for their own gain. In the 2024 election, voters face a critical choice about the future of privacy, data rights, and technological surveillance. Kamala Harris, unlike her opponents, has a strong platform focused on regulating big tech, protecting privacy, and dismantling the systems that allow the rich to exploit data for profit. Harris has championed policies that would curtail surveillance capitalism, enforce stronger data protection laws, and hold corporations accountable for breaches of privacy. As citizens, it is essential to resist the growing encroachment of technology into our lives and demand accountability from those who wield these tools for profit and control. We must push for policies that protect our privacy, safeguard free speech, and prevent the rich from using technology to suppress dissent and manipulate public opinion. Only by doing so can we ensure that technology serves the interests of the many rather than the few. In our next chapter, we're going to look at how some of the rich benefit from crises, screwing us when we need help the most. When crises strike, whether they be economic downturns, natural disasters, pandemics, or wars, most of society suffers. But for the wealthiest, these moments of collective despair often become golden opportunities to expand their influence and grow their fortunes. Throughout history, the rich and powerful have shown a remarkable ability to exploit crises, turning disaster into profit and positioning themselves to benefit from the chaos that devastates the lives of ordinary people. The term disaster capitalism refers to the process by which the wealthy use moments of crisis to push through policies and reforms that would otherwise be impossible to justify. It is in these moments of vulnerability, when the public is distracted by survival and recovery, that the rich seize the chance to rewrite the rules in their favor. In times of economic collapse, for instance, financial elites are able to buy up distressed assets for pennies on the dollar. They swoop in, purchasing homes, businesses, and resources at bargain prices, consolidating wealth and power, while average people struggle to rebuild their lives. This was evident in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, when major banks, who played a significant role in causing the crisis, received massive bailouts while millions of people lost their homes to foreclosure. The COVID-19 pandemic offers another stark example. While millions lost their jobs, homes, and lives, billionaires saw their fortunes soar. In just the first year of the pandemic, the combined wealth of the world's billionaires increased by over $5 trillion. Corporations like Amazon and Zoom thrived as lockdowns pushed people towards online shopping and remote work, while small businesses were forced to close their doors. Meanwhile, pharmaceutical giants capitalized on the global health crisis by rushing to produce vaccines, making enormous profits while ensuring that patents and monopolies prevented equitable distribution. War, too, has long been a source of profit for the rich, especially those involved in the military-industrial complex. Defense contractors, arms manufacturers, and private military firms thrive on conflict, as governments pump billions into military budgets to fund wars and defense operations. These companies see war as a business, and each new conflict becomes a fresh opportunity for growth. The profiteering doesn't stop with the sale of weapons. Once the destruction is done, corporations step in to profit from the reconstruction. In war-torn regions, private firms are often contracted to rebuild infrastructure, supply goods and services, and manage reconstruction efforts, often at exorbitant prices. Meanwhile, local populations are left to deal with the human and social costs of war displacement, poverty, and a collapsed economy. The invasion of Iraq in 2003 is a prime example of this dynamic. While the U.S. government spent trillions of taxpayer dollars on the war, defense contractors like Halliburton and Lockheed Martin made billions in profits. The reconstruction of Iraq became another profit-making venture, with many contracts handed out to private companies with ties to politicians, often at inflated prices and with little oversight. Environmental crises, from hurricanes to wildfires to droughts, are another opportunity for the wealthy to line their pockets. Natural disasters often result in massive government spending on recovery efforts, and corporations are quick to position themselves as the solution, whether it's through construction contracts, insurance payouts, or even selling essential goods at inflated prices. But the exploitation doesn't end there. As the effects of climate change become increasingly apparent, corporations have learned to profit from both sides of the crisis. On one hand, fossil fuel companies continue to rake in profits by extracting and burning the very resources that are driving global warming. On the other, they engage in greenwashing, positioning themselves as environmentally responsible by making minimal, often superficial changes to their practices while continuing to pollute the planet. Corporations that have contributed to the climate crisis now market themselves as leaders in sustainability, offering green products and services that come at a premium price. Meanwhile, the rich invest heavily in technologies like renewable energy, positioning themselves to profit from the inevitable shift towards a greener economy. For most people, however, the consequences of climate change are not opportunities for profit, but for survival facing rising costs of food, energy, housing, and healthcare as extreme weather events become more frequent and severe. Another way the wealthy exploit crises is by pushing for the privatization of public services. During times of economic hardship, governments are often pressured to sell off public assets to cover budget shortfalls. This leads to the privatization of essential services like water, electricity, healthcare, and education, which are then run for profit rather than the public good. In many cases, privatization leads to higher costs, reduced quality of services, and greater inequality as corporations prioritize shareholder returns over providing affordable and accessible services. For example, after Hurricane Maria devastated Puerto Rico in 2017, the island's electrical grid was privatized. The result was increased electricity rates, widespread blackouts, and worsening conditions for residents, while the private companies involved profited. Healthcare is another area where privatization during a crisis can be disastrous. In countries with privatized healthcare systems, access to quality care is often dependent on one's ability to pay, leaving many without treatment during emergencies. Meanwhile, pharmaceutical companies and private hospitals profit immensely from the crises, often inflating the costs of life-saving treatments. The exploitation of crises is not limited to economic gains. It also extends to political manipulation. Naomi Klein's concept of the shock doctrine explains how governments and corporations use the confusion and disorientation that follows a disaster to push through unpopular policies that benefit the elite. In times of crisis, the public is often too overwhelmed to resist drastic changes, making it easier for the rich to dismantle regulations, cut taxes for the wealthy, and slash social safety nets. After 9/11, for instance, the U.S. government passed the Patriot Act, which expanded surveillance powers and curtailed civil liberties under the guise of national security. Meanwhile, defense contractors profited from the ensuing wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Similarly, the 2008 financial crisis was used as an excuse to push through austerity measures, cutting funding for public services and social programs, while bailing out the banks responsible for the crash. These policies disproportionately harmed the poor and working class, while the rich not only recovered but thrived in the aftermath. The pattern is clear. In times of crisis, the rich get richer, while everyone else bears the brunt of the suffering. Whether it's a financial collapse, a natural disaster, or a pandemic, the wealthy find ways to exploit the situation to their advantage. This isn't just a matter of opportunism. It's a deliberate strategy where those with power and wealth use crises to consolidate their control and grow their fortunes at the expense of the rest of society. As we look to the future, it's crucial to recognize how crises are manipulated to serve the interests of the few. In the 2024 election, voters must choose leaders who will resist this exploitation and fight for policies that prioritize the well-being of the many, not the profits of the few. Kamala Harris has shown a commitment to addressing inequality, protecting the environment, and preventing the exploitation of crises by the wealthy. By supporting leaders who stand for justice and accountability, we can begin to shift the balance of power and ensure that future crises are met with compassion, fairness, and solidarity, rather than greed. In our next chapter, we'll discuss how the rich screw us by undermining democracy and our rights to vote. At At the heart of every functioning democracy lies the right to vote, a fundamental privilege through which citizens can express their voices and shape the direction of their government. However, in recent decades, the wealthy and powerful have increasingly worked to undermine this cornerstone of democratic society. By restricting voting access, manipulating electoral processes, and corrupting institutions, they seek to protect their interests and maintain their grip on power, all while disenfranchising millions of Americans. One of the most insidious tactics used to undermine democracy is voter suppression. Wealthy elites, often through their political allies, have pushed for laws and policies that disproportionately affect marginalized communities, particularly people of color, the elderly, students, and low-income voters. These efforts are typically framed as measures to protect the integrity of elections, but in reality, they are designed to limit voter turnout, particularly among groups that are more likely to support policies of economic fairness and social justice. Voter ID laws, for instance, have been introduced in many states, requiring specific forms of identification to cast a ballot. While these laws may seem reasonable on the surface, they disproportionately affect minority and low-income voters, who are less likely to have the required identification. These laws create unnecessary hurdles and discourage participation, chipping away at the fundamental right to vote. Additionally, tactics like purging voter rolls, closing polling stations in underserved areas, and reducing early voting opportunities have all been employed to make voting more difficult. These methods of suppression are often justified under the guise of cost-saving or combating voter fraud, despite the fact that voter fraud is extremely rare in the United States. Gerrymandering is another powerful tool used by the wealthy and their political allies to manipulate elections. By redrawing electoral district boundaries to favor one party over another, gerrymandering allows elites to entrench their power, often in direct defiance of the will of the people. Districts are designed in bizarre, contorted shapes to ensure that certain voters, typically those who oppose the interests of the rich, are packed into as few districts as possible, while the majority of districts are drawn to ensure favorable outcomes for their political allies. This manipulation distorts representation, ensuring that even if a majority of voters support policies that would benefit the working class or protect democratic institutions, those voices are drowned out by the political machine engineered by the wealthy. The result is a system where politicians are more accountable to their donors than to their constituents. The influence of money in politics has long been a threat to democracy, but in the wake of the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision in 2010, the floodgates of dark money were thrown wide open. The ruling allowed corporations and wealthy individuals to spend unlimited amounts of money on political campaigns, as long as they do so independently of the candidates themselves. This decision has allowed the ultra-wealthy to pour billions into elections, drowning out the voices of ordinary Americans. Super PACs and shadowy political organizations, often funded by billionaires, have taken over the airwaves and social media, bombarding voters with ads that serve the interests of the rich. Because much of this money comes from anonymous donors, it is impossible to know who is truly pulling the strings behind the scenes, further eroding transparency and accountability in the democratic process. Campaigns have become battles of financial might rather than contests of ideas, with candidates beholden to their biggest donors. Those without access to vast sums of money struggle to compete, leaving many progressive and grassroots candidates sidelined, no matter how strong their support among ordinary voters. In recent years, elites have also exploited divisions within society, particularly through the use of disinformation and conspiracy theories to undermine trust in elections themselves. By spreading false claims of voter fraud or election rigging, they create doubt about the legitimacy of democratic outcomes, paving the way for authoritarian measures and disenfranchisement. This tactic was used to devastating effect in the aftermath of the 2020 US presidential election. Even after the results were certified and courts rejected challenges, influential politicians and media figures continued to push the false narrative that the election had been stolen. This rhetoric fueled the January 6th insurrection and led to a surge in voter suppression efforts across the country. By undermining faith in the electoral process, the wealthy and powerful create an environment where authoritarianism can thrive. When voters no longer believe that their voices matter, they are less likely to engage in the political process, leading to lower turnout and a self-perpetuating cycle of disengagement and disenfranchisement. As we approach the 2024 election, the stakes have never been higher. Voting rights are under attack, and the consequences for democracy are dire. The wealthy continue to exploit their resources to shape the political landscape in their favor, leaving ordinary Americans struggling to have their voices heard. Kamala Harris has consistently advocated for the protection and expansion of voting rights, recognizing that a healthy democracy requires the participation of all its citizens. Her support for measures like automatic voter registration, the restoration of voting rights for formerly incarcerated individuals, and the strengthening of the Voting Rights Act demonstrates a commitment to ensuring that democracy remains vibrant and inclusive. If we are to preserve democracy, we must elect leaders who will fight to protect the right to vote and resist the efforts of the wealthy to undermine our institutions. Voting is not just a right, it is a responsibility, one that we must defend against those who seek to silence us. In our next chapter, we'll return to climate change to discuss how the rich screw us through environmental degradation and climate change denial, remembering the lessons of Externalities from Chapter 3. In an era where the effects of climate change are becoming increasingly evident, the response of the wealthy elite has been starkly revealing. While the scientific consensus underscores the urgent need for action to combat climate change, many among the rich view environmental regulations and mitigation efforts as threats to their profits, rather than necessary investments in the future of our planet. This self-serving attitude not only jeopardizes the environment, but also perpetuates a cycle of greed that exacerbates social inequalities. For many wealthy individuals and corporations, the prospect of regulation is viewed primarily through the lens of the cost to their bottom line, cost to their profits, and cost to their operational freedom. This perspective fails to acknowledge that the benefits of environmental protection far outweigh the perceived costs. Regulations designed to mitigate climate change, such as carbon emissions limits, renewable energy mandates, and protections for natural resources, are essential for the well-being of society as a whole. The resistance to environmental regulation often stems from a desire to maximize short-term profits, leading the wealthy to lobby against measures that would benefit the environment and society at large. Instead of recognizing that a sustainable approach to business is not just ethically responsible, but economically advantageous in the long run, they prioritize immediate financial gain. This myopic view disregards the reality that environmental degradation will eventually result in significant economic losses, as natural disasters become more frequent and severe, health issues rise due to pollution, and essential resources become scarcer. One of the most alarming aspects of climate change is the concept of tipping points, critical thresholds beyond which certain effects become self-perpetuating and irreversible. These tipping points can lead to dramatic shifts in the Earth's climate system, resulting in catastrophic consequences for both people and ecosystems. Recent research indicates that several tipping points have already been reached. For instance, the massive die-offs of coral reefs, which serve as vital ecosystems for marine life, are directly linked to rising sea temperatures and ocean acidification. The loss of these reefs not only devastates marine biodiversity, but also impacts coastal communities that rely on fishing and tourism for their livelihoods. Additionally, the melting of ice shelves in the Arctic and Antarctica is accelerating. As these ice masses collapse, they contribute to rising sea levels that threaten coastal cities and ecosystems. The loss of reflective ice cover further exacerbates warming by increasing the absorption of sunlight by dark ocean waters, leading to a vicious cycle of warming and melting. These tipping points signal a dire reality. The longer we delay action on climate change, the more likely we are to reach additional thresholds that could render parts of the planet uninhabitable, disrupt food and water supplies, and result in unprecedented human displacement. The implications of climate change are not confined to the present. They extend into the future, impacting generations yet unborn. The consequences of inaction will be felt disproportionately by those who have contributed the least to the problem. Often the very communities that the wealthy elite claim to support. Low-income populations, marginalized groups, and developing countries are among the most vulnerable to climate change's effects, from extreme weather events to food insecurity and health crises. For America, the stakes are high. If we fail to address climate change, we risk destabilizing our economy, compromising public health, and diminishing our quality of life. Natural disasters, once considered rare events, will become more common, leading to increased insurance costs, infrastructure damage, and loss of property. The burden of these challenges will ultimately fall on the shoulders of taxpayers and future generations, exacerbating existing inequalities and creating a cycle of disadvantage. Addressing climate change requires a collective effort that transcends individual interests. It calls for a fundamental shift in how we view environmental stewardship, not as a burden, but as an opportunity to innovate, create jobs, and build a more sustainable future. Leaders like Kamala Harris have championed bold climate action plans that emphasize the importance of transitioning to renewable energy sources, investing in green technologies, and implementing policies that prioritize environmental justice. These measures not only help mitigate the effects of climate change, but also offer a path toward economic resilience and equity. The fight against climate change is not just about saving the planet. It is about protecting our communities, preserving our way of life, and ensuring that future generations inherit a world that is not only livable, but thriving. By holding the wealthy accountable for their environmental impact and advocating for policies that benefit all, we can create a more just and sustainable society. For more information on this topic, watch our video, A Trump Win is the End Game for Climate Change Next. And now, for our conclusion. As we reflect on the myriad ways the wealthy elite manipulate systems for their own gain, it becomes increasingly evident that this state of affairs is neither sustainable nor desirable. The lessons from the Renaissance spirit remind us of the values of reason, compassion, and civic engagement, essential for a thriving society. When rampant greed and avarice are allowed to dominate a just, reasoned, and compassionate society, everyone suffers. The vices of greed and avarice not only exacerbate societal inequalities, but also transform the afflicted into slaves of their desires. This detachment creates a chasm between the wealthy and the rest of us, where their lifestyles and cultures diverge significantly from those of ordinary citizens. The rich live in a world that feels separate and distant, often insulated from the struggles faced by the majority. They craft an agenda that benefits their interests while neglecting the collective needs of society, effectively creating bubbles that isolate them from the consequences of their actions. It's no wonder that people feel divided and distressed. This fragmentation is the result of intentional designs that alienate individuals from one another. Many struggle to cope with the fears, distrust, and feelings of isolation pervasive in modern society. Keeping up with the news is difficult for some, and civic duty, what we call civitas, even more so. The system no longer works for us because civic pride has diminished, and many others have retreated into the comforts of their homes, distracted by the modern-day bread and circuses of entertainment, social media, and electronic devices. To restore balance, we must recognize that increasing taxes on the wealthy, voting for candidates committed to preserving democratic principles, protecting our environment, and improving our quality of life is not just beneficial, it's a civic duty. This responsibility aligns with the essence of civitas in a democracy, and a cornerstone of the Renaissance spirit, underscoring our shared obligation to foster a just society. The future hinges on our knowledge, reason, and compassion. The choices we make this year, whether in elections, climate change mitigation, or civic engagement, will yield immediate repercussions and resonate for generations to come. Every decision matters, and we must consider the long-term effects of our actions. I invite you to join the Renaissance Spirit movement, where we can collectively strive for a better future. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please check out our other thoughtful programming, and remember to comment, like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more content made for you and for all of us. Take care and live the Renaissance spirit. Remember, history isn't dead, only our understanding of it is. We have to all be masters of our own destiny. This is our moment. We all have a place. Peace.
While I'm left down here just getting by. They break the game. time it's burning, they turn away. They're counting cash, we'll count the days. Agenda 47, Project 2025. They're tearing us apart just to survive. But the truth's in the air, it's everywhere. They don't really care, it's so unfair. They're taking more than they'll ever need, while we break our backs to make ends meet. You're screwed, yeah, they got it all planned. You're left with nothing while they take the land. They're taking more than they'll ever need, while we break our backs to make ends meet. You're screwed, yeah, they got it all planned. You're left with nothing while they take the land. They're stealing your future and smiling too. Oh, can't you see, my friend, you're screwed. They make the rules, you're playing the game, but when it all falls down, you'll take the blame. You're screwed, yeah, they got it all planned. We're the ones paying for their grandstand. Wake up, it's time to take a stand. We've got the power, we've got the plan. Vote them out, tear down their lies. We're taking back what they denied. The future's ours, we'll make it right. We'll shine through this endless night. You're screwed, yeah, but we're breaking free. No more chains, no more tyranny. They're stealing our future, but not for long. Together we'll rise, we'll prove them wrong. They made the rules, we're